I waited there in the med bay for what felt like ages, contemplating the sheer severity of my fuck-up. Every primordial instinct still slithering about within my mind knew that Zemera wasn't to be trusted. Maybe I didn't have much of a choice in the matter, but that didn't absolve me of guilt for all but serving up Earth on a silver platter for these tyrants. Andrew? The playful purr of an unfamiliar voice shocked me back into reality, as immediately I turned to regard the new face watching me from one of the medbay doors. It can't be. The feline body structure of this particular alien was one I recognized all too well from Ulmara. This was a senol, the very race Zemera had just told me about. It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Zemera's assistant. You may call me Ekali. Beckoning me forth with a flick of her claw, turns out we were correct regarding their retractability, the senol took off at a pedestrian clip down the pristine hull of Zemera's vessel, stopping only momentarily to ensure my following. Your room isn't far, she assured me, turning down yet another long uniform hallway and waiting for me to follow suit before proceeding. I apologize for Zemera's emotional distress. She was serving as the Great Steward's second-in-command during my species integration, and the memory weighs heavily upon her. I don't understand, I began, momentarily quickening my pace so as to walk alongside rather than behind this senol. You're working for the people who killed almost your entire species. They destroyed your very culture. Does that not bother you? Nope, Ekali sang, her almost cheerful response lacking in even a moment's hesitation. Contrary to my expectations, her expression of cool contentment didn't waver for so much as a single second. To describe my response as baffled would be an understatement. You mean to tell me you don't care even a little that your entire species' identity was wiped out? With all due respect, Andrew, the senol began, her even tone faltering to betray beneath it something almost akin to a cat's hiss. My species' identity was one of fascist tyrants and the looming threat of nuclear annihilation. We needed the Aragon. Says them, I exclaimed, exasperated by the clear indoctrination of this alien. Surely no matter how deeply this one had drank of the Conqueror's Kool-Aid, she couldn't be genuinely unbothered by this. Evidently, however, my protests had served only to pinch a nerve. Listen here, Ekali spat, wrapping her clawed hand around my arm and squeezing tight enough for the small keratin razors to press against my flesh like tiny knives. My ancestor was a pleasure slave to one of Ulmara's dictators. She spent a decade of her life drugged beyond sense into a mindless stupor. If the senol remained free, she'd have been put to death the moment her master was done with her. It is only because of the Aragon's mercy that I was allowed to be born. So what? I barked, yanking my arm from Ekali's grasp with a wince as her claws carved into my flesh trails of blood. You're happy to be a slave to them instead? Hearing my point presented before her, the senol merely scoffed. You think I'm a slave? She asked, regarding the notion as one would the ravings of a madman. I am a citizen of the Empire. I can vote. I own a home. Stars, the main freedom you have that I don't is that of starving on the streets if you don't work hard enough. If anything, it's you who's a slave. Such a strong rebuttal to my statement made it abundantly clear that this alien had no desire to hear me out. And so instead of continuing to aggravate her, I elected to remain silent for the remainder of our walk to my room. Sorry, I lost my temper, Ekali sighed, placing her weird handpaw against a scanner set within the chrome wall, which promptly blinked green as the door in front of us silently slid open. I didn't mean to injure you, human. It's just that, well, I owe everything to the Aragon. Without them, I wouldn't get to even be alive today, let alone be where I am in life. And where exactly are you? I asked, my tone one not of accusation, but rather genuine curiosity. This question was apparently much more palatable to Ekali than my previous ones, as rather than a scowl, she met it with a closing of her eyes, a gesture presumably meaning relaxation if Earth felines were anything to go by. I live in luxury. I have all the books I could ever read. My bonded mate is the most wonderful senol in all the Empire, and to top it all off, I have an amazing job where I get to meet new alien species and share with them the wonders of our civilization. Honestly, I can hardly think of a single thing I would change. Try as I may have, I could hardly fault Ekali for being so pleased with her life beneath the Aragon. After all, it wasn't like she'd ever known anything else. "I'm glad you're happy," I sighed defeatedly, stepping into the luxurious living area of my designated room. "And you could be too," the senol continued, her tail swishing back and forth, presumably with excitement. However, upon sight of my displeased expression, the wagging promptly ceased. "The room will be electronically locked for your own safety," she sighed, regarding my barely buried glare with a sad look in her eyes. I hope you come to understand that this is what's best for your species, Andrew. Goodbye." And with that, the door slid shut, once again leaving me alone with my thoughts. My conversation with the senol weighed heavily upon my thoughts as I paced back and forth across the main stretch of my glorified prison cell. Across from the shockingly normal, albeit comically proportioned bed, was what I presumed to be some sort of holographic television. Piqued though my curiosity was, I could hardly bring myself to turn it on. In my mind, accepting such a luxury could be misconstrued as acceptance of my overall circumstance. Fortunately, Zemera didn't make me wait long for the gift of her presence, arriving at the entrance to my room after only about half an hour of waiting. "May I come in?" she asked, fidgeting sheepishly with her personal communications device as she spoke. "I don't suppose you'll take no for answer, will you?" I snarked, my tongue tipped with bitterness as I recalled the distinct absence of this question before she probed my brain. "Andrew, please," whimpered the Iragon woman. "I know it seems like I crossed a line, but that's because you fucking did," I shouted, interrupting her pathetic excuse for an excuse. To my surprise, this response elicited from the Iragon a look of seemingly genuine remorse. "Let's talk," she began anew, stepping into my cell and sitting down on the bed before inviting me to do the same. "No more tricks, I promise. Give me one good reason I shouldn't just walk out of that door right now," I barked, well aware of this threat's empty nature as I gestured to the still open door. "Well, you wouldn't get far, first of all," Zemera cooed playfully, patting the place beside her on the bed, much as she had back in the med bay. "Our security staff are armed with tranquilizer bullets, so unless you'd like another nap to help you cool off, it wouldn't be the most productive waste of my goodwill. Besides, we left Arquisa's orbit an hour ago." Alarm bells within my mind went wild upon that last comment, prompting me to step toward her with cautious curiosity. "Where exactly are we?" I asked her, doing my best to mask the panic swelling up within. "We're on Aleph, the first Dyson sphere built by my people and the center of trade throughout the Iragon Empire," she answered bluntly. "All 126 species residing within our benevolent grasp can be found here." 126. In the context of alien species, such a number was hard to comprehend. The sheer volume cultural diversity crushed beneath the Iragon's heels was frankly sickening. Reluctantly approaching the bed and taking a seat beside Zemera, I craned my neck to look her in the eye. "And you don't see anything wrong with that?" I asked her. "Destroying the identity of so many people?" "How about we discuss something lighter?" the Iragon interjected, her smile growing increasingly strained in response to my question. "Let's get to know each other a little. Fun fact about myself is that because my role is technically military, I was required to do a fitness exam to enter," she stammered, clearly desperate to change the subject. "I failed my first one because I couldn't meet the one-armed lifting requirement of 3 tons. Staggering as that figure was, I wasn't about to allow it to distract me from my concerns. "Your people committed cultural genocide on the senol. Is that what you do to every alien civilization you integrate?" "Another, fun fact about me is that my lowermost wings didn't grow in until I was 31. Can you believe that? Most Iragon get theirs before 25, so I was a really late—" "You told me no more tricks, didn't you?" I hissed, tossing Zemera my coldest possible glare. "Are you going to actually talk to me or just keep wasting my time with personal trivia?" Hearing this, Zemera fell silent. Minutes dragged by like hours as she began sifting through the contents of her personal communications device. "Tell me, human," she began, her features growing colder and her expression more distant as she spoke. "How many lives is a culture worth?" "It's priceless," I replied, hardly even registering her question before spitting out the admittedly somewhat cliché response. "Allow me to rephrase," Zemera proceeded, casting her gaze to the ceiling as she visibly contemplated her next words. How many people would you kill if it meant creating a new culture? 1, 1,000, 1,000,000? 0, I snapped in reply, my reflexes forcing an honest answer out of me. What kind of question is that? Hearing this, however, the Eragon merely shrugged. And how many lives would you take to preserve a culture? I don't know, I confessed, turning the question over within my mind. I guess that depends on what kind of culture it is. Here, continued Zemera, handing me her communications device as on its holographic screen, a low-quality video began playing. In it, 2 lemur-like aliens could be seen positioned on pedestals as all around them, other members of their species could be seen cheering. Watch this. I knew before the first one opened their mouth that this was some form of political debate. Judging by the crowd's enthusiasm, it was over something important. Maybe it's an economic thing, or perhaps they're debating going to war. My speculations, however, could never have come close to the truth of what I was about to hear. For the good of our nation and our very species, the Ergsil race must be culled, one of the politicians demanded, prompting from his half of the crowd uproarious cheers of agreement. Oh boy, a genocidal nationalist faction. Let's hope that other guy manages to win over the crowd. You truly are an evil Rikis, the other politician hissed, slamming his fist upon the pedestal in anger. What could possibly be gained by cleansing such an earnest, hard-working people? Good to hear these Rekis had a voice of reason. I wonder what sort of events led up to such a... Clearly it is the Usiks who should be cleansed. Surely I hadn't heard that right. These 2 Rekis weren't debating whether or not they should wipe out an entire section of their species. They were debating which one. This back and forth between the 2 primate-like creatures continued for a while, growing more sickening by the word as new names got brought up. Names of their previous victims, the Dusk, the Sikval, the Jekalakwain. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Zemera, on the other hand, listened to this debate with detached dejection. Clearly, it was one she'd heard before. The Rikis are a species in our empire, she explained, pausing the video before turning to face me directly. Before we uplifted them, this was their culture. Politicians campaigned on which ethnic group they were to annihilate, and when the time came to fulfill their promises, they did so without fail. You're lying to me, I spat, my features nevertheless quivering upon the ever-encroaching notion that she might not be. How could such a system possibly function? How could it even arise in the first place? We don't know, shrugged Zemera, turning off her communication device and setting it down beside her. They'd been cleansing their population for over 1,000 years by the time we found them. We estimate their victims to have numbered in the billions. This wasn't the action of a single government, but of their entire civilization. Tell me, Andrew, is this a culture deserving of its own existence? Every culture deserves to exist. Hearing this, the Eragon regarded me with a look of almost maternal disappointment. I'm sure the children in the culling cages would have loved to hear you lecture them about how much you value their culture, she snarked, her facial features twisting into a smile of condescension. Honestly, I'd expected more empathy from you. That's still just one example, I began, standing up from the bed with a frustrated huff and pacing back and forth across the room. You want more? Zemera sneered, again plucking up her device and with a few button presses conjuring into the air above her palm a holographic depiction of another species almost resembling humanoid goats. Before we rescued them, the Yikail lived in total anarchy. They believed that whatever you were strong enough to take belonged to you. Food, lives, mates. Is this a culture worth preserving? Yes, no, There was no good response to that question. Not one I was privy to, at the very least. Much as I deplored their methods, the logic behind the Eragon's conquest was beginning to make more sense. Where do you draw the line, Andrew? How many lives must a culture ruin and take before it loses your little seal of approval? For a while I elected to remain silent, staring ponderously at my reflection within the spotless chrome wall. Finally, after a long period of quiet contemplation shared between us, I decided to answer her question with the very same one. Where do you draw the line? One starving orphan is one too many, Zemira sighed. Staring into my reflection, I watched as the Iragon came up behind me and placed her hand upon my shoulder. "I'm not asking you to like it," she conceded, gently spinning me around to face her. "I'm asking that you understand. Please, I need some time to think." "Of course," she replied, her tone returning to its bubbly self as she produced from her pocket a second communication device and tucked it into my hands. "Here, feel free to search the web while you think." She smiled. "We can talk again tomorrow." And with that, the Iragon turned around and walked out the door, sealing me in with my own tumultuous thoughts as cellmates.